Okay. I'm so glad to so glad to see you all here, and so glad that we got to experience this deep into the pandemic such a rookie mistake of unmuting. It doesn't happen every day, but let me briefly thank Governor Kean for his introductory remarks. Governor, you're just an inspiration to us, and introduce the rest of this panel here that we're going to begin with. Judith Batty, the CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA, former Governor Bob McDonnell of the state of Virginia, and sitting current governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers. Welcome to all of you. We're so glad to have this conversation now about the work of civic education and education reform that's happening in the states. But I actually want to begin, Judith, with you, because you have a bird's eye view of what's going on across the United States. And not everybody who's gathered at this summit may realize the extent to which the Girl Scouts of the USA have really committed to this idea of civic engagement and civic learning. In fact, folks who might have scouts in their families or have been a Girl Scout earlier in their lives may not even realize that fairly recently you all have created a civic engagement badge connected to this work. And so I want to just begin by asking you, what is it about civic engagement that has led you all to be so committed to this work? And why is the Girl Scouts of the USA wanting to focus on boosting the civic literacy of the rising generation right now?
Thank you, Eric, and nice to meet you. And thank you to Civics Now for having me on this panel. It's a great opportunity for Girl Scouts, and I'm delighted to be here. To talk about civics education, Girl Scouts have been at the forefront of civic engagement since our founding in 110 years ago. And in recent years, we've done a study with our girls. We've done some research, and we've realized that youth today have suffered from not having civics education. So, we're about doing, we're about action. And 2 years ago, in early 2020, we released a series of badges on civics education. We thought it was imperative and important that our girls are engaged to become engaged citizens. They grow up to become engaged, involved citizens. And our badges are tailored to each age level. We have brownies and daisies and juniors, so our badges are tailored to each age level. And they teach the girls about the branches of government, political parties, what it means to be a democracy. They teach them about the Constitution and what's included in it and what's not included in it. And it teaches them about the importance of voting. And I'm really happy to say that we launched our program in 2020. And since we've launched our program, it's become one of our most popular series of programming. And it was really important for us during the launch that it was launched virtually because of the pandemic. So during the launch, our girls were able to stay connected not only to learning and Girl Scouts, but they were learning about their communities and they were learning about government. And we were filling a gap that a lot of girls were experiencing because they weren't in school and they weren't able to connect physically with their friends. So they were able to stay connected virtually while also learning about how to be an engaged citizen. So it's been a great program. I can also happily say that this year alone, so this is the second year of the program, this year alone, over 100,000 girls have earned their badges. So, we are in every zip code, and it's been a great program for our girls.
That's remarkable in that time under those circumstances. And, I think when you ask anybody in the realm of civic education, what would success look like? People would start describing a young person who is pretty much a Girl Scout, right?
Yes.
Someone who shows up, someone who has that sense of responsibility and curiosity. And, one of the things as well, when you think about Girl Scouts, you think about the generational and intergenerational dimension of this work. And we're gathered here today fairly recently after commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And we've been noting that not only, of course, have the most recent members of our armed services who've entered into these conflicts. Many of them weren't born or were just toddlers when 9/11 happened. When you think about the Girl Scouts today, you think how few of them, of course, grew up with any sense of the origins of the world that emerged after 9/11. And Governor Kean, I wanted to come back to you because, of course, you had really the opportunity to serve our country with Democratic Congressman Lee Hamilton to lead the bipartisan 9/11 Commission. And I'm wondering what insights from that experience in our times right now, which are so polarized, where bipartisanship is so hard to come by, what things you might be able to share from that experience to pass along to policymakers and civics practitioners right now about how we can boost state and federal civic education policies?
Well, first of all, you get nowhere without compromise. We're a very divided country right now. Partisanship is as bad as I've ever seen it. And people aren't talking sensibly with each other at the moment. And if you understand civics and you understand our history, you understand this country wouldn't have been here without a compromise at the Constitutional Convention, the so-called New Jersey Plan, which big states and small states. Without that compromise, we wouldn't have a country. And it's important for people to understand that and know that. So if I learned something out of the commission was that Republicans and Democrats, when it's in the interest of the country, can get together, can talk to each other, and really help this democracy move forward. Because without that, without compromise, without civility, this democracy isn't going to do very well in the future.
Well, that's actually, I'm going to segue straight from that, Governor, to Governor Evers, because those thoughts, those ideas about polarization right now are on display in every state of the union right now. And yours is no exception. In many ways, yours has been a pace setter for some of the arguments that we're having in the United States. And you, like actually every one of our panelists, come to this topic having thought about it and practiced it a long time. You were superintendent of public instruction before you were governor. And so you were thinking about the state of public education in Wisconsin. And when you hear Governor Kean speak there about kind of as educators would put it, the skills, dispositions, and behaviors of compromise, what do you think is possible right now in the live arena of political combat in your state? And what are the things that you're trying to do to build bridges around civic learning and the opportunity to actually get bipartisan support for civic education?
Great question. And compromise is obviously a difficult thing in our world today. You think about, ranging from, what's happening in Washington, D.C. to what's happening in school boards across the state with lack of compromise, lack of civility. And so this is a critical time as it relates to the future of our country. I do believe that compromise is possible, but in turn, we also have to make sure that as we think about civics and compromise and being a good community member and all the things that are important for us to be civically literate, and especially our next generation be civically literate, we really do have to make sure that we're working with everybody to reach that compromise, and that's a difficult part. I mean, there may be a chance for me to talk today about legislation that is being proposed around civics education, but the state does have a role to play in this. It's playing out every single day. But I liked your comments in the very beginning when we're talking about civics as it relates to being in Seattle or Madison or a small town in Wisconsin. Might look different, and we have to be prepared for that difference. Because if civics becomes a top-down requirement, I think a top-down requirement is possible, but how it looks in different places, certainly everybody's going to want to learn about the three branches of government and, kind of the basics. But after that, it really becomes a reflection of what's going on in those communities across our state and across our country. And that's where I want to head as a state. We need to be inclusive in discussing and how we teach civics in Wisconsin. I've always supported iCivics as a great program. I think it's it sets a good floor for what civics should look like in Madison, Milwaukee, Baraboo, Crandon, Wisconsin. But if we don't allow that local input and local attachment to civics, we're losing the argument, and frankly, we're losing the ability to compromise. So those are the things that concern me. I can go into detail about what's being proposed in Wisconsin, but
we'll circle back to that. We will circle back to that legislation and some of the current topics that you all are debating in the legislature there. But Governor McDonnell, I want to bring you into the conversation. I think about when you hear your former gubernatorial colleagues here and Judith, Batty talking about these dispositions, and but again, talking about the way in which civics and civic learning is rooted in place. You yourself began a career as a member of the House of Delegates. Then you were state attorney general before you were governor, right? And so even within the Commonwealth of Virginia, you have a sense of how you can't just do things one size fits all, right? Even within a state, much less across the United States. And Virginia, of course, by its history and by its origins in our republic, has a lot to teach the United States about these core arguments in American life, right? I think one of the things that has been striking about the conversation around civics is it's not just the mechanics of how a bill becomes a law, and it's not just the facts of three branches of government, but it's about the things that Americans are always going to be in tension about, right? An active, strong central government versus local control, approach to law that is about color blindness or an approach to law that is about color consciousness, an emphasis on freedom versus an emphasis on equality, right? And I want to hear from you, Governor, having been so steeped in the life and civic history of Virginia, what you feel like Virginia can teach the United States about how you navigate those tensions in American life in ways that are consistent with the spirit of compromise that Governor Kean said and the spirit of local rootedness that Governor Evers is talking about. What can Virginia teach us?
Well, thanks, Eric, and I appreciate what you do and Louise and the other governors have done in their states. And I agree with Governor Kean. I really think this is an existential issue for the United States. As divided as we are, and our founders warned us about this in their writings back in the 1790s and beyond about the spirit of party and what political party over focus on policy and people, what it would do to the republic, and they were prophetic, and here we are today. I think, and if I might give a quick civics lesson, Governor Kean, I appreciate the New Jersey compromise. Let me give a plug for the Virginia proposal for the Constitution. Mr. Madison and Mr. that original plan that they proposed in Philadelphia that all became part of what the founders put together in that extraordinary 3.5 months that led to the miracle of 1787 that every American should know about. Eric, I've been fortunate to go to some naturalization ceremonies, and I'm so impressed with what the new Americans know, what they learn. And unfortunately, what some of us that are born and raised here in America, what we take for granted as Americans. And so Virginia, of course, called the mother of presidents, the cradle of democracy from its role going back to 1607 and the founding of the first English-speaking colony. And man, have we had our share of ups and downs, the good and the bad. A lot of it's taken place on Virginia soil. And so I think what we saw probably in the last 20 years is a bipartisan effort, as our legislature's been controlled by both Democrats and Republicans, is a focus on getting civics education into the standards of learning and into the curriculum, and then even more so promoting character education. We had several bills between 1997 and 2013 that took some of these basic traditional values that are not partisan, of respect for the golden rule and hard work and perseverance and respect for the rule of law and equal justice under the law, and made that sort of the basics of our civics education program. We actually had a quote in one of the bills that said, Virginia's civic values are the principles in the Bill of Rights. I think that's that's probably hard to argue with. Mr. Mason's Bill of Rights, the great 10 principles undergirded the Constitution. So I think that's vitally important. Mr. Adams, John Adams, said that it's that the Constitution of the United States is only suitable for a moral people and wholly inappropriate for any other. And so this idea of virtue, of character, sprinkled also with civility in being able to find, as the governors and Judith have said, the common ground, to be able to find solutions, which is, I think, what most people want: Democrat, Republican, independent, black, white, religious, non-religious. They're looking for solutions so that they can live the American dream. And this basic idea of the golden rule, which is just respect for others, treating other people as you'd like to be treated, is so fundamental to the American experience, and what we've tried to do in Virginia under governors of both parties, that I think we can find a lot of common ground around these kinds of principles and get people to honor those. And we see things in like the problem-solving Congress and the caucus in the Congress, where people are putting aside some ideology and just looking for solutions. And I think this is really important.
Well, Governor, thank you for that. And when you started talking about Virginia's role in the Constitutional Convention, I thought you and Governor Kean were about to have a good old-fashioned Virginia versus New Jersey throwdown there. I'm glad you retreated to the spirit of compromise here. But yeah. Judith, I actually, to pick up on what Governor McDonnell's talking about there at the end around character, you know, in our work at Citizen University, we have this very simple equation that we often use to define citizenship in the broadest sense, which is power plus character equals citizenship. That to live like a citizen is, in the first place, to understand how power works around you. And that can be how a bill becomes a law, but it can also be who decides, right? Who decides on any particular issue. But being literate in power, while necessary, is insufficient. You have to couple that literacy with a grounding in character. And we emphasize, as Governor McDonnell was just saying, that civic character is not just about individual virtues. It's not just about grit or perseverance or niceness. But it's about how it's character in the collective, right? How we live together. And I think one of the things that's been interesting over the last few years in the realm of civic education and education generally, and I think the Girl Scouts live this every day, is that there's become a real cross-ideological, cross-partisan appreciation for the importance of cultivating character. That this may have been language that was used by one part of the political spectrum a couple of decades ago, and the other part was like, hey, what's that all about? But now everybody, I think, is starting to come around to the idea that this stuff matters. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that in the context of the Girl Scouts, and how the cultivation of civic character not only is not partisan, but more importantly, is foundational to creating a strong contributing girl or citizen in our country.
Yeah. So, you know, what we say is Girl Scouts builds women of courage, character, and confidence. And that you are so right. And you know, our program is ideally suited to build that because it's an experiential program. So yes, girls learn about government, they learn about the Constitution, they learn about, you know, who decides a law, how a law gets made. But more importantly, they put that learning into action. In order for girls to earn their badges, they have to take action. And so not only do they learn about it, but they learn how to live it, and they learn how to live it together. So they learn how to compromise, and they're exercising that compromise muscle. They're exercising their education muscle. They are understanding and living the global citizenship model that we want everyone to live. And so, yes, Girl Scouts is ideally placed to do that, and it is at the core of who we are. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier is also as part of our civics education programming, we also have a toolkit for our girls to use to encourage voter turnout and voter education. So girls are not only helping themselves and learning, but they are also helping their communities because they are getting out the vote and they are talking to their leaders, their parents, their relatives about the importance of voting and what it means, and the importance of being an involved citizen and what it means. So yes, courage, confidence, character, those are all things that go into building engaged citizens. And that is our sweet spot. That's what we do. We build girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a
I
better
love
place.
that. Well, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for alliteration, but I think those three C's are true and great in any context. And Governor Evers, I want to come back to you because I think appreciated you were beginning to kind of tip us into some conversations that get us past all the warm and fuzzies and get to some of the harder things that emerge around civics. You alluded to the fact that folks in different parts of Wisconsin, whether small town or bigger cities, are going to have, of course, their own distinctive, locally rooted ways of approaching civics. But you also alluded to the ways in which you want this work to be inclusive of people who are in the state right now, but also inclusive of the full spectrum of our past and our present. Governor McDonnell alluded to that in talking about Virginia, right? Every state of the union can tell you a story about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it's meant to be an American. And I think what we're seeing around the country right now is some effort sometimes to say, let's focus on the good. The bad and the ugly, no. And part of what I think is challenging right now is for us to, in a way that is bipartisan and in a way that, frankly, this is not a generational thing to Judith and the Girl Scouts, is grown up. Grown-ups face the bad and the ugly as well as the good, right? And Governor Evers, the civics debates that are unfolding in your state, I know you alluded to a piece of legislation that's unfolding there right now. What will it take? What kind of work will have to happen around civics in the legislature there to get a bill to you that you would feel comfortable signing and would feel both inclusive of the people and inclusive of the full spectrum of our past and our present?
Yeah, and that's a great question that we're dealing with right now. And I have to say, the Girl Scouts do a great job. I really appreciate this conversation and bringing that point up. But yes, we have a bill that's in front of the legislature now, and frankly, it was crafted and rolled out in ways that really, it's a good civics lesson in and of itself. It was a last minute bill with a hearing created, a day before it was going to be introduced, a hearing, so people across the state didn't have any opportunity to react to the proposal. And essentially it tips the scale to the legislature to determine. In Wisconsin's tradition around curriculum and instruction is that there has to be some local control over this. There has to be local input. There has to be the good and the bad being discussed. And the piece of legislation, frankly, doesn't go there. This bill will, for the very first time in the state's history, whatever the curriculum is, whatever the instructional strategies are, whatever the materials that are going to be used, will be determined by the legislature, which is a huge leap for them, I think. But in addition, it goes against, frankly, what we've learned in civics in Wisconsin when I was growing up, is that this is something that has to be, we have to involve people in the decisions. This cannot be made by 100 people in the legislature, and that's exactly what this is about. In fact, to go through some really inane things here, our administrative rule process, which will determine what is taught and how, is essentially controlled by two people. And that, is this a good civics lesson and how not to do something? Absolutely, yes. Is there a great support for civics across the state of Wisconsin? Absolutely, yes. We just need to broaden that conversation. We need to involve teachers. We need to involve kids. We need to make sure that it isn't just about the good of our country. It also needs a conversation about the bad. We also have to be willing to talk about controversial issues. And so these are things that take time and effort, and we need to broaden the base of people that are making decisions. I believe those decisions are best made locally. Yes, the legislature and the governor have a role in kind of setting the stage, making sure that everybody's involved, and that just isn't what this is about. It's an unfortunate situation. So now we can argue, unfortunately, about civics in Wisconsin, which is not civics.
Well, thank you, Governor Evers. And Governor McDonnell, I actually want to come back to you, picking up on that, because, a lot of what you're hearing Governor Evers say there, local control, let the people closest to the situation determine things, is language and rhetoric that certainly in the past and in some quarters still today, one would have associated with your party and not his, with the Republican Party more than the Democratic Party, that language. And it's a measure of how things are changing. When you spoke earlier of the golden rule, what occurred to me is that one of the things that's missing in our politics right now, certainly in Washington, but I think increasingly in state capitals around the country right now, is a mindset that is sort of whatever the opposite of the golden rule is. People cannot imagine, people want to do what they can when they're in power and not imagine what it might be like to be on the receiving end of the rules that they're setting up. Right? People increasingly are oriented toward we're going to achieve victory right now, and it's going to be scorched earth. And we're not going to contemplate a day when we might be in the minority, or contemplate a day when others might have a different view of things. And so, I think one of the questions for you, Governor, is just, right now, let me speak plainly. A lot of these debates around legislation to take control away on some of these topics and remove them to the legislature, or to disallow some topics from being taught, are coming from one party today. It happens to be the party you've been part of. But in some number of years down the road, you can completely imagine the same thing happening with the other party, deciding, we're going to have to do this and we're going to take control of this. It happens that at this moment, this is what's happening. How do you, as somebody who's done this work across party lines, how do you speak to members of your own party to kind of remind or warn them of, hey, there's going to be a time where you're not going to want this rule set applied to you? How do you change that conversation?
Well, thanks, Eric, for the question. I may disagree a little bit with some of the premise about my party, if you will. On that score, I think this is the reason the founders warned us about the spirit of party and political parties. When you put short-term power and politics over people and principle, this is what you get. And I think through the couple hundred years of the American experiment, we've seen excesses in both political parties, and I think that's probably self-evident. I mean, Virginia is such a place of contrast. It was one of my predecessors, George Yardley in 1619, that did this first slave trade deal. And yet we're the capital of the Confederacy. We're the home of the first African-American governor, my friend Doug Wilder. And we've now at sort of the epicenter of some civil rights movement for the positive in our state. So we've been a state of great contrast. And I think a couple things. One, when you have in Virginia, let's say a one-term governor or a governor of 4 years or a term of 2 years, you start to look at things in a very short term, and that's the next election as opposed to the next generation. I know that's trite, but it is a true saying. And I think a couple things. You mentioned the concept of subsidiarity and federalism, which is so fundamental to the American experiment, that we didn't trust too much power at one level of government. Federalist 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if angels governed men, wouldn't need controls on government. I mean, Hamilton was brilliant in understanding the problem with human beings governing. And that's why, having some degree of character and morality and understanding of the essence of the American experiment is so vital for the continuation of the republic. We often look at things in sort of a Machiavellian way when we're in the majority, and look at it very differently when we're majority. And I think there's hypocrisy, honestly, in both political parties. And I've tried my best, probably like the other governors, to call that out, regardless of who's calling the shots. So I think, to me, the answer is let's find a way through character education and civics education to look at the next generation of leaders to be the statesmen like the ones that founded this country, to be able to deliver a new generation of problem solvers. My concern is in the year 2045, we're a majority non-white country. And if we have some of the same problems we do now about race and harmony and equal justice under the law, it's going to be magnified that much more in 20 years. So we better all collectively, Democrat, Republican, do a better job in setting an example as statesmen. And civics education is a great way to do it.
Well, Governor, that kind of farsightedness is at the essence, the core of statesmanship, being able to look ahead, look around the corner to 2045, or the fact that we're headed that way. And absolutely, I want to emphasize in talking about the acts and the tendencies of one party today. It is to say that let me make explicit: the other party has abused power and engage in hypocrisy in its own ways at other times in history and on other issues in these times. So I think one of the things that we learn in studying civics is, well, as Hamilton wrote in Federalist Papers, human nature will play out. And when it's organized and mobilized in a partisan way, human nature will play out in ways that warp our incentives away from statesmanship, away from the long term, and towards short-term scorched earth approaches to victory. And I want to close this remarkable conversation, Governor Kean, with you, because when I think about statesmanship, when I think about taking the long view, and frankly, when I think about living the long view, Governor McDonnell has spoken about people like the founders and the framers, and we got to look around and remember, in my state of Washington, Governor Dan Evans, a colleague of yours from back in the day, is a living such figure who embodies all of those virtues and values and statesmanship of the founding generation, as do you, Governor Kean. And I just want to invite you to close our panel by thinking about what message do you have for the girls who are joining Scouting right now? What is your message across the generations to the girls and boys, to the young people who are entering in and trying to figure out, how do I build some of this muscle? How do I learn how to change things around me? And what is the message that you want to give from your lifetime of experience and service?
Briefly, study history, study history, study history. I lived in a time when there was one source of information. You listened to a fellow called Walter Cronkite at night, you got what the news was, and then you reacted from that news. We live in an era now where people make up their own facts, and then they give the news. And so it's much more difficult to be a citizen. And if you haven't studied civics, if you don't understand yourself what's true and what isn't true, if you don't know a bit of the history, if you don't know where the government came from, you don't know why slavery was not brought up at the Constitutional Convention, if you don't know any of these things, you're a sucker for these people from the far right or the far left to come on the radio or come on television and tell you things that frankly just aren't true in many cases. So civics, the idea of knowing yourself, is so important, not only for you individually, but for the preservation of this democracy. Democracy is a very fragile form of government. The last 500 years there have been a lot more oligarchies, a lot more dictatorships than there have been democracies. So it's hard to maintain a democracy unless you understand it, unless you study civics and can react yourself to what you hear from their politicians and others. Then we're not going to have a great future in this country. And for you, that generation you're talking about, we need a great future. We should have a great future. And with learning, with knowledge, with civics, you can have that future.
Well, Governor Kean, couldn't have said it better, and thank you so much for those closing thoughts. And I want to thank again our remarkable panel, Judith, Batty, and Governors Kean, McDonnell, and Evers. Thank you so much for setting us off and setting us up for a great summit here. And let me now turn it over to another remarkable panel that's going to begin shortly.